No Wizard, and today we are going to continue our series of my newsletter about a new story of humanity and how to change the world for the better. Right. So last time we left off on a disclaimer of why I wanted to write this and why, despite my not having any deep credibility, I still think it's worthwhile for me to do this. This section, I'm super excited to finally get into the meat of the article, really the beginning of the article of the actual essay is starting with debunking human nature, right, and why we can change. So I'm going to try and not do any director's cut until the very end to see where I'm at with the time because I really want to keep this down to 10 minutes. So I have a lot to say. So I don't know. Let's get into it. The first of the biggest problems today is a prefiguration of all or most the other problems, that of human nature, specifically the assumption of what human nature even is. Before we can even get into identifying the many problems in our society today, we must first show that these problems are not some inevitable or necessary result of some perceived flaws or sins of humanity. Sin is not a universal constant. Many people, primarily religious people, but even secular folks with religious mindset, love to assume that people are just inherently evil, greedy, selfish, or some other synonym of sinful in nature. This is wrong. This is misanthropic. This only serves to justify hate for humanity in your heart. I will explain why this is wrong, but first, recognize that I do not and cannot change you if you truly believe this. I only seek to supply an alternative view of the world. Hopefully, you can use this alternative view to walk yourself out of such a dark home like I once did. Anyways, the view that people are inherently bad in some way is a very long standing philosophical concept, one that has almost always been used to justify some collection and abuse of power. The different manifestations of this are such things like humans are inherently competitive and therefore we need systems like capitalism. Humans are inherently violent and therefore we need laws and police to protect us. People are greedy, so we need taxes and tax write offs to give people a reason to share. People are selfish, so we need to incentivize cooperation through national identity. People are lazy, so we need to incentivize them to work through wage labor, etc., etc. As you can see, the very idea that humans are not good immediately is and must be followed by a justification for some restrictive or coercive action, usually one in which somebody places themselves or someone else in a position of power to enforce those restrictions and coercions. By viewing humans in such a way, it's similar to viewing a dog as if it's really a rabid wolf, barely restrained by a metal chain affixed to a big pole in the backyard. Instead of realizing how vastly different and domesticated a dog is, you assume that thousands of years of evolution has virtually no bearing and that you must dominate it through physical, mental, or emotional abuse in order to tame it. And even then, you must keep vigilance or of its rabid nature will be unleashed. Whenever a dog does something bad, which people often mistakenly conflate as both general undesirable behavior, which is subjective, and truly violent behavior, instead of seeing that as a result of a bad environment or training or some other causal factor, you instead assume that such is its such is its natural state coming out. While if it does something good, you attribute that to your ever so skilled use of domination tactics. It's an inherently narcissistic and deluded mindset. In reality, dogs are and have been domesticated for thousands of years. A dog is no more a wolf than we are an ape or a chimp. There are very few similar traits. And furthermore, viewing evolution as going from bad to good, or dumber to smarter, or even weaker to stronger, or more animalistic, i.e., savage, to less animalistic, i.e., civilized, is such a childish and inherently flawed perception. Evolution is simply adapting to one's environment over time. A chicken is more evolved than its ancestor, the T Rex. And if we domesticated the chicken to the point that it cannot survive on its own, think about that for a second. Many people assume that apes and wolves and other wild animals are just violent creatures, barely restrained from their impulses by necessity or human involvement. Many folks here assume that evolution has made us better than every other animal, or that evolution is not real and that some higher power designed us to be the masters of the earth, of the universe, even. I didn't write that part, but I should have. Both of those are deeply, or both of these are deeply problematic perceptions because once again, it justifies the domination of those other animals and even each other, ourselves, for our safety or to be civilized or because God said so. Furthermore, the extent to which in which we dominate is seen as necessary, even when we ourselves admit that the violence, abuse, manipulation, and other tactics are undesirable mechanics of that domination. Excuse me. So you see, viewing human nature is evil, or I'm sorry, viewing human nature as evil or inherently bad in some way necessitates a, quite frankly, evil and bad approach to dealing with other humans and the world. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of negativity. I argue not quite the opposite, but certainly something more hopeful and realistic. Human nature is simply social because being social is one of the prime ways where we have adapted to our environments to gain intelligence and sapience. If you care about the science of evolution, even a brief search will show you that the vast majority of theories on how humans evolved intelligence revolves mostly around our use of social skills. Everything else, competition, tool use, and even raw intelligence in terms of being able to compute, are things found in other animals, sometimes to an even higher degree than in humans. The one thing that we have that almost no other animal has is social skills, particularly the ability to get what we want by cooperating with others through those social skills. How that social adaptation manifests depends on a huge amount of variables. So yeah, that's my first section there. And it looks like I have 3 minutes. I'm gonna do a little director's cut, you know. Excited to get to the next one, but I'll leave that for next time. And in regards to this, there's a couple things I wanted to touch on more, and I do touch on them later on, anyways. But like these things right here, these are not, like I said, etc. Like, there's so many kind of these justifications of example of, oh, what humans are, and therefore we need this system, we need this power structure, right? Just think about it for yourself for a second, right? If you ever hear some sort of, oh, we need this because humans are blah, right? Think about that for a second. Just think about what they're saying. They're saying that they need a justification, like this. They recognize that this authority figure or this system is not really ideal, right? But we need it because humans are not perfect or whatever, right? But in reality, we don't need to be perfect in order to be decent people. And furthermore, most people are decent people, in a general kind of context, and it really depends more on one's environment rather than some inherent failure of a person. And something I about this too that I have recently, came to a realization on is that whenever we have this idea of perfection or of the rational man or the, of logic or uh, the evolved man or whatever, right? We're actually within our minds, whether you're religious or not, comparing ourselves to an idea of a God, right? To the idea of this perfect being that's objectively good, that knows everything, that is objectively logical or objective, right? That very idea of this absolute thing of objectivity, logic, good, whatever, right? Is in itself a God, you know, complex, is a God concept, rather, I should say. And what that means is that it's an incredibly unrealistic idea because there is no God, right? You can believe that there is a God. I'll say that. but there is no way you can prove that there is a God. It goes against the very idea of there being a God. So regardless of whether or not you believe that there is a God, for you to compare us to that, idea, to that idea of perfection, is inherently terrible, is inherently destructive, is inherently, you know, um, just not helpful to the human experience, because the human experience is not a thing of of perfection, right? It's not a thing of being a perfectly objective or perfectly logical or rational or anything. All these ideas are made up, right? On the everyday practical thing, our behavior, our beliefs, all that is contingent upon the environment, is contingent upon culture, is it contingent upon genetics, all these other factors that we can see and measure here on Earth, right? So, or that we believe, affects us, right? Even if we can't directly measure it. So there's a lot of things like this. I really like this metaphor I did here of the dog, because that's how, we kind of, I think that's a good way of visualizing the problem with this idea, right? Is it whenever you think that, oh, we need, society, right, quote unquote society, right? And by society we really mean, government and police and things like that, right? By saying that we need these things, what you're actually saying is that we need these chains, right? We need somebody to hook us up to the pole in the backyard, because without it, we're just gonna go out, right? We're just gonna be all, and this is why people often attribute or often compare, or rather often conceptualize anarchy as chaos, as wild and craziness, right? Because they can't imagine that without the chains of government and all this other stuff, protecting us, restricting us, that we would actually just be decent people, right? So I think this is a good visual as well. And this right here is a huge thing. This like, again, this is a huge problem that we have as a society in almost every culture, specifically westernized cultures, um, but every culture that, and notice, I'm not saying that evolution isn't real, that craziness. What I'm saying is that the idea of evolution, right, is wrong. People are thinking about evolution in terms of going towards a goal, right? Going towards a better, quote unquote, better, system. But in reality, evolution doesn't care about quote unquote better in an objective sense, because once again, there is no objective thing. All evolution is a process of adapting to one's environment to better reproduce, right? So again, a chicken is more evolved than a freaking dinosaur, but we regard dinosaurs as more like cool, right? Just bigger, stronger, all this other stuff, and we eat chickens, right? We just breed them just so we eat them. They can't even survive on their own. So, but they're more evolved because we have forced them into that position, right? Um, Without them, they'd be like, other birds, so which are pretty cool, right? Don't get me wrong, but it's not the same as a dinosaur, right? The dinosaur would eat all these birds alive, right? It's not even a comparison in terms of which is quote unquote better, but they don't they don't live in this hierarchy of better and worse. They live in terms of their environments, their contextual environments. And so when we think about ourselves and this evolutionary, tree, branch, whatever, first of all, we should see it more like a tree rather than a path or something like that, because a path, again, kind of insinuates that you're going towards a goal. And in reality, evolution is about branching down different areas in terms of the environment. So we are evolved for a specific environment that we have largely created, but also have benefited in terms of all the other things that's going on. I'll get into those things, later on, starting with this section next. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I wanted to talk about here, and I really hope that this section alone, right, changes the paradigm a bit on in terms of how people think about ourselves and nature and our place in nature and things like that. Because again, this is why philosophy is so important, right? Because if we don't understand these things, if we don't think about how we think about the world, how we think about ourselves and all that other stuff, then we just accept what's the common parlance, right? We just accept the common story with very little critical thoughts. And when you just accept that, you just fall into all sorts of bullshit. Like, It's really important for us to actually, think critically about what we tell ourselves and what we're being told in terms of our understanding of human nature and society and whatnot. But yeah, super excited to keep going with this. I hope other folks are excited as well. Let me know what you learned. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with. Love to have a discussion about this stuff. And thanks again for listening and watching. Have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.